All right. So, Mr. Metcalf here. Oh, what's that? Weird. We are going to go over the last assignment that you turned in, which was Unit 3, Module 12. So we're going to talk a little bit about Chinese history. The Chinese are super important. Even though they didn't, people leave them out often, they had some really important inventions that really affect us today, like gunpowder and the block printing press and the improvement of paper, compass, things like that. Okay, so we're going to go through these questions, talk a little bit about them, and then we will move on from there. So, number one, what problems could the feudal system create, and how would a nation overcome these issues? So, let's understand the feudal system first. At the very top of the pyramid is the king or the emperor, who granted land to nobles in exchange for loyalty and the use of their armies. That's kind of what the loyalty meant. Okay. Underneath them were the nobles, okay, who gave the loyalty to their king as well as their armies in exchange for the use of the land. Of course, they're not going to farm it themselves. Next were the peasants, who worked the land for the nobles in exchange for shelter, protection, and food. And then the very bottom. Now, let me just throw this out there. With the noble class, okay, you're going to have soldiers and scholars. Okay. With the peasants, you're going to have farmers and craftsmen. Okay. So it goes emperor with nobles kind of there, soldiers, scholars, farmers, craftsmen. And at the very bottom, you're going to have the merchants. They had the lowest status because they benefited from others' work. That's why they were put so low. They weren't poor by any means. They made money, right? So it's interesting to note that this social class isn't just based on money. It's based on position or job that you do. Okay. Now, this could create a whole load of problems to include discord between the different classes because of what one has and others don't have. There's little social mobility. Nobles who wanted more power could cause a lot of instability by pulling their armies from the king and creating civil war. And there's a lack of education at all the different levels. Okay, just depended on who you were. That depended on what kind of education you got. Okay. So let's look at this. The merchants were the lowliest class. If they were such a lowly class, why were Chinese empires so invested in the Silk Road and trading with other countries? Because they made money off of it. I mean, there's more than that, right? But really, it was the money aspect. They made a boatload of money off of silk, especially. Okay. And without that merchant class, they wouldn't have been able to do that. They needed people to move things back and forth. Why the merchants stayed at the bottom? I don't know. Maybe just because the money aspect. I mean, they made dough. They made some good money. Okay. Number three, why do you believe the Chinese progressed during the Tang and Song dynasties especially, but would come to a halt after the development of many important inventions? So these two specific time periods, trade was encouraged, mostly for the money. Okay. But when you're trading, right, there's going to be sharing of ideas, there's going to be competition, sharing of technology, beliefs, so on and so forth. Okay. I believe that those things came back to them and helped spur their innovation, helped to create new ideas and things like that, so that they were able to create new things. Right now, there's a time when that comes when they kind of become prideful and stingy with their inventions, and they stop major interaction with the outside world. Part of it is focusing more on the military because they're getting invaded, and there's some civil war going on. Okay. And that causes them also to stunt their growth, or it also stunts their growth because they're focused more on one thing than another. Just, an example of where we've seen that in the past would be with the Spartans, right? Their main focus was their military and that kind of lifestyle. And because of that, they didn't have a lot of technological advances or art and cultural advances or things like that. Okay. And really, if you look at it, it's been the last 40 years since China opened up trade where they have really flourished. I mean, they have. I have to look at the numbers, but I think they're just like the United States and China are neck and neck economically throughout the world, right? So very important to understand that, right? They've opened themselves up to trade and a little bit of capitalism, and they are exploding technologically and scientifically and economically, especially, right? So trade has a huge impact. Okay, now this was just number 4 is my opinion. Okay, so what do you believe is the most important invention in terms of its lasting impact on the past and present? I said gunpowder because of the impact it has had on the world in general. I will answer at first with a question. If the Chinese do not trade gunpowder with the Europeans, would they have been as dominant as they were? Like, would they have been able to conquer the Americas, for instance? I'm not convinced they would have been. Think about the other things that gunpowder and its explosiveness have led to. Bombs, atomic bombs, nuclear bombs. I believe we can even look at other scientific breakthroughs like atomic research and nuclear power, and even the CERN super collider, which I think is in Switzerland. I'm not 100% sure, right? Where they collide atoms together to create energy. I'm not saying that gunpowder is the sole reason that these things happened, but I think that it played a part. I think I could probably do a thesis paper on that for a doctorate, maybe, and that would provide plenty of good quality information. Okay. All right, so let's check this one out. This one was a little more difficult. A lot of people struggled with this because you had to look outside the box a little bit. How does the Tang Empire compare to America's history? Are there similarities to other countries as well? So I think we could look at the civil service, right? In the 1880s, in the United States, the Civil Service Act was created so that there was no longer cronyism or the good old boy system. You had to be qualified in order to serve in the government, right? Well, China had that way back. They had a similar thing. You had to take tests, you had to study, you had to understand your job and know how to do your job in the government. I think we could look at civil war, right? Both countries had civil war. Now, one led to the end of a dynasty. The other led to well, it didn't lead to the end of our country. It led to not. It led to the end of the institution of slavery, not necessarily equality, but better things to come, I should say, eventually, and still going on today. Taxes, high taxes. There have been times throughout our history where we've had higher taxes, lower taxes. The Tang, for instance, had high taxes to pay for different projects that they were doing, like the Grand Canal, for instance. Okay, you could also look at the drought that they had, and the drought in the United States during the Dust Bowl of the 40s, right? So there's all kinds of examples if you really look through history, and you could even throw in the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution as well. There are civil wars of sorts, and other things. Okay, so there's all kinds of comparisons. We just need to look. So what that tells us is there's more similarities, I think, than we know out there. Okay, between countries and between peoples. Why was the Tang Empire called the Golden Age of Ancient China, and which one of the many reasons do you think is the most significant? I kind of answered the significant thing. You guys may have different. A lot of people had paper. I said because of the improvements in technology, improved paper, block printing, gunpowder, the compass, paper money, new and improved agricultural techniques, expansion of trade on the Silk Road, steel weapons, gas stoves, clockmaking, territorial expansion, which is going to help in all of these, right? I really, that's why they call it the Golden Age. There was so much happening and so many improvements during this time period. Okay. Now this one is a little difficult too. You really had to look into it. Okay. So Number 7, what do both the Song dynasty periods tell us about the balance of power and government, and why is it important? Okay, balancing power is always a tough thing, right? If you focus if you focus too much energy in one spot of the government as compared to the other, there's suffering somewhere. Whether it's art and culture or science and technology or even your military, right? They struggled with that at one point in time. They weren't as focused on the military. They were getting invaded, so they had to move their capital south, and then they focused more on the military. They drained their resources, right? So balance and power, balance of power is super important. There's been times throughout the United States history where the president has had more power than the Congress, or the Congress more power than the president, or at one point in time where it seemed like the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, had more power than anybody else, or at least people were afraid of him a little bit. So balance of power, it's a tough thing, right? It's one of the reasons why, like, the United States has set up their government the way they have, so that there is a balance of power, a checks and balances system, so that there's not an imbalance anywhere. Okay. Finally, number 8, what prevented the Mongols from continuing the Song dynasty's industrialization after takeover? So I think the main thing they talked about, and they didn't use the word industrialization, but the main thing they talked about was mining. Okay. The Song dynasty folks knew how to mine. Now, it said they were kind of sedentary wasn't the word they used. I can't remember it exactly, but it said the Song folks, when they were conquered, were kind of, well, they didn't want to do much work for the Mongols. Makes sense, right? You just get conquered by people that you don't want to conquer you, that you don't want to do as much work, right? So they're not willingly sharing that information. I think you could also add into it that there was pockets of rebel Song members that were fighting against the Mongols for a long period of time afterwards, right? So then you have this group of people, the Mongols, who are coming in. They're originally nomadic. They don't settle down. Mining and industrialization is not a thing for them. So they need to first secure the area, which it takes them a while to do. So their focus is going to be more on securing and conquering than it is on, hey, let's get these people to mine for us and do exactly what we want, right? So I think that's going to be a big thing that prevents the Mongols from continuing that industrialization. All right, now I'm just going to go over this real quick. Here's the order of how they go, and this was in the notes, okay? EFBADC. There it is. So hopefully you guys got all this. If you have questions, again, please email me, let me know. Don't make changes. Add to your answers. If you didn't have complete answers, just highlight it or do it in a different color or something of that nature. So it shows me that you went through and you actually took the time to look at some of the answers. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a good day.